story begins in a Siberian prison where we see numerous German soldiers lined up. After the end of the Second World War, Russia had taken many German soldiers as prisoners, forcing them to toil day and night in coal mines. Although the prison security was not particularly stringent, no one dared to escape because the facility was surrounded by kilometers of snow, with the nearest human settlement roughly 14,000 kilometers away. Thus, even if a prisoner contemplated escape, the bone-chilling cold of Siberia ensured certain death. The prison was deliberately built thousands of kilometers away in the midst of snow, making it so that no prisoner had ever escaped or even considered it. However, among these prisoners was one exceptionally clever man who was determined to escape and return to his family. His name was Clemens Foyle, and he had been sentenced to 25 years in the prison. Clemens was resolute that he would not let half his life waste away in captivity. By a stroke of luck, one day he seized an opportunity to escape, sneaking out of the prison in a goods lorry. Upon emerging under the open sky and seeing the stars, he was overwhelmed with joy. But he had barely traveled a short distance when the lorry was stopped. Peering out, Clemens saw a Russian soldier standing before him with a rifle aimed at his head. Unfortunately, Clemens was caught and, for the crime of attempting to escape, was locked in a cell for 2 days. When he was brought out, the prison warden informed him that his fellow prisoners were eagerly awaiting him. As soon as Clemens returned to the prison, his comrades, armed with sticks and batons, were waiting for him. They were furious because his escape attempt had resulted in all of them being deprived of food for the past 2 days. The other prisoners attacked Clemens, leaving him severely injured and requiring admission to the prison hospital. The prison doctor was also a German prisoner. As soon as Clemens regained consciousness, he told the doctor, "I want to escape this prison again, and I need your help." The doctor was astonished by Clemens' determination. He explained that escaping the prison alive was impossible, and that even if Clemens managed to get out, the freezing cold outside would make survival unlikely. However, he also admitted that staying in the prison would lead to certain death, as the coal mines where they worked had such high levels of carbon that it entered the body through the air, causing deadly diseases like cancer. For this reason, the doctor advised Clemens to make one final attempt to escape. He then gave Clemens all his warm clothing, boots, and essential supplies. Additionally, he informed Clemens that the Russian soldiers hid their food near the railway line. Before parting, the doctor handed Clemens a gun for self-defense. In truth, the doctor had collected these items because he too had once planned to escape. However, a week earlier, he had learned he had cancer and only 1 month left to live. As he handed Clemens a lunchbox, he said, "If you make it back alive, deliver this to my family and tell them I'm gone." Later that night, under the cover of darkness, Clemens escaped the prison again, this time choosing to travel on foot rather than in a goods lorry. The next morning, when the warden discovered Clemens had escaped, he immediately went to question the doctor, but the doctor had already taken his own life. The warden then summoned several Russian soldiers and ordered them to capture Clemens alive. Despite days of searching, no trace of Clemens was found. The prisoners began to believe he had frozen to death, but the warden, knowing Clemens' resilience, refused to give up and ordered the search to continue. Meanwhile, we see Clemens forging through a blizzard with unwavering determination. 9 days had passed since his escape, when he suddenly heard the sound of barking dogs. Turning around, he saw a sleigh rapidly approaching. Before he could react, the sleigh passed over him and sped away. At that moment, Clemens awoke, realizing it had all been a dream. In reality, 9 days of walking had depleted his food supplies, and hunger and exhaustion had taken their toll. Continuing forward seemed nearly impossible, but Clemens pressed on. A few days later, his body gave out, and he fainted from hunger. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, he heard a strange sound. His eyes fell upon a seal, and a spark of hope ignited within him. He quickly drew his gun and attempted to aim, but weakness caused him to miss and the seal began to flee. After days without food, Clemens refused to let this chance slip away. He chased after the seal, and just as it hid behind a rock, he fired his last bullet, striking it. Overjoyed, Clemens celebrated, knowing he now had food to sustain his journey. After eating heartily for the first time in days and resting briefly, he resumed his trek. Throughout this long journey, Clemens was utterly alone, surrounded by nothing but snow. In such an environment, his mental state could have deteriorated, so he kept himself sane by talking to himself and maintaining a positive outlook. He constantly checked his compass to avoid getting lost in the snowy expanse. Days turned into weeks, and after 2 months of relentless walking, Clemens spotted a small tree in the snowy wilderness. The sight of the tree filled him with joy, as if he had discovered a treasure. He ran to it and embraced it, for the tree signaled the end of the snowy plain and the beginning of a forest. Meanwhile, the warden, still searching for Clemens, ordered his soldiers to scour a 500-kilometer radius. As Clemens ventured into the forest, a sudden blizzard struck, uprooting even large trees. While struggling to move forward, a massive tree fell directly onto him. Fortunately, 2 men searching for gold happened to pass by and saved his life just in time. The 3 then traveled together, eventually emerging from the snowy wilderness after days of journeying. Along the way, they encountered a river, which they attempted to cross using a makeshift wooden boat. However, the river's current grew stronger, causing the boat to spiral out of control. One of Clemens' companions lost his balance and fell into the water. Without hesitation, Clemens dove in and dragged the man to safety. Meanwhile, their other companion abandoned them, taking the gold for himself. When Clemens and the remaining man reached their camp, the latter, enraged by his friend's betrayal, shot him dead. Clemens and the surviving companion then gathered their belongings and continued their journey. For months, they trudged on, hoping to find a human settlement. The forest was blanketed in snow, and the heavy load carried by Clemens' companion slowed their progress. To help, Clemens offered to carry some of the load, but the man grew suspicious, believing Clemens intended to steal his gold. In a fit of paranoia, he attacked Clemens, knocking him unconscious. When Clemens came to, he saw a pack of wolves approaching. Desperate to survive, he began climbing a tree, but a wolf grabbed his leg. The tree weakened, snapped, and Clemens fell. Certain of his impending death, he was saved at the last moment by local hunters who shot the wolves. They took him to their village, where the villagers treated his injuries. After years of hardship, Clemens had finally reached a human settlement. He stayed in the village for several days, where the people cared for him warmly. One day, a letter arrived in the village from the warden, stating that a German soldier had escaped from the prison and warning that anyone aiding him would face death. Fearing for the villagers' safety, Clemens decided to leave. Before departing, the villagers gave him food, water, and a hunting dog. Remarkably, Clemens was no longer alone on his journey. He and the dog traveled together for days. Soon, they came across a lumber factory, and the dog ran inside in search of food. Clemens followed and was recognized by the workers, who took him to the factory owner. Moved by Clemens's story, the owner fed him and arranged for him to board a train to Germany. Clemens was elated, believing he was finally going home. Unbeknownst to him, the owner had informed the warden. At the train station, the warden and his soldiers were waiting. However, Clemens spotted them from a distance and leapt off the train, escaping once again. The soldiers gave chase, and just as Clemens thought he was cornered, his dog attacked the warden, biting him. Seizing the moment Clemens fled, a gunshot rang out, and when he looked back, he saw his dog lying dead. Heartbroken but determined, Clemens kept running, eventually escaping by jumping onto a passing train under a bridge. By the time the warden could react, Clemens was far gone. Years passed, and by 1952, 7 years after his escape, Clemens found himself in Central Asia, wandering through a village fair. Hungry but penniless, he could only watch as food was sold around him. 2 girls selling pancakes caught his eye, and though he longed to eat, he had no money. As he turned to leave, one of the girls, moved by pity, offered him a piece of pancake. Hesitant at first, Clemens accepted and ate it gratefully. A man at the fair, who had once been a German prisoner himself, witnessed this and followed Clemens to a church. Understanding his plight, the man man chose to help rather than turn him in. He took Clemens to his home, where Clemens shaved and regained his former appearance. The man provided him with a new passport to cross the Russian border into Germany. Clemens thanked him and set off for the border. Days later, he reached the Russian border and presented his passport to a soldier. Fearing the passport might be recognized as fake, Clemens was tense, but fortunately, he was allowed to pass. Overwhelmed with joy, he crossed the